Good evening and welcome to Midweek. Coming up on tonight's show, last week we revealed that Larry Murphy is holed up in Amsterdam. Unfortunately, the people living there didn't know they had a convicted rapist living among them. As these revelations make headlines across Europe, we ask, what now for the beast of Baltinglass? Thank you, Ciara, for that report. Now, people living in Amsterdam were shocked and angry when we revealed on last week's show that the dangerous rapist Larry Murphy was living there. The following morning, a number of Dutch television stations approached us for information. Midweek's Michael Ryan has this report.
Van de zwaarste criminelen uit het land blijkt nu een onbezorgd leven te leiden in Amsterdam. Larry Murphy.
Last Thursday night's news on Dutch national TV channel RTL was all about Larry Murphy. The newsreaders say Irish people were shocked to hear that one of their most notorious criminals seemed to be living the good life in Amsterdam. Larry Murphy, they said, had spent years in jail and that a crime reporter had found him living in the Dutch capital. Just 24 hours earlier, most people living in Amsterdam had never even heard of Larry Murphy. But last week's shocking revelations on Midweek that one of Ireland's biggest sex offenders was living in the city and hanging around with another convicted Irish sex offender changed all that.
They go to work together, they go fishing together, they actually are inseparable. No communication with anybody else.
Yes.
And a lot of people would say, okay, they would say maybe Larry Murphy is a reformed character and he's trying to get on with his life, and that would be fair. But even the most experienced people dealing with sex offenders or whatever would say to you that that is a very disturbing development. And it is a very disturbing development because these two gentlemen are together. When we talked to sources here, they expressed grave concern that these two people were together.
The morning after the show, we got calls from television stations in Amsterdam asking if they could use the Midweek footage to warn their viewers Murphy was in the city. Dutch websites soon had the latest photos of him, taken from the previous night's Midweek. This one asked readers how much they really knew about their neighbours, while a third website spoke about the dangerous Irish criminal who lives and works in Amsterdam. The Dutch people were angry that Murphy had been living in their midst since January and they knew nothing about it. Another TV station, AT5, interviewed local women who live in his neighbourhood. This lady said it was horrible to hear the news. She said there are many women and children living in the area and she was frightened when she saw the reports. Meanwhile, this lady also said it was scary and that Murphy shouldn't have been allowed move into the area. She said people living nearby should have been told and that Amsterdam is an open society, but not for these kinds of people. Police in Amsterdam said they had been informed earlier this year about Murphy's presence by officers from Europol in The Hague, but they weren't given a fixed address. They said they would be visiting him in light of the latest revelations, but couldn't bow to pressure that he should be followed because he isn't suspected of any crimes. Meanwhile, back home, the Irish newspapers also ran with the story for the next few days and into last weekend. More than 2 years after being released from prison, Murphy still sells papers. One story quoted a pregnant woman living in Amsterdam who said she hired the carpenter as a handyman to do work in her house after being introduced to him in a pub. She even gave him her house key to come and go as he pleased and couldn't believe it when she found out who he was. This CCTV footage from a bar near Murphy's flat also emerged, showing him on a night out. The owner told newspapers in Holland that he turned up most weeks with his sex offender friend to drink pints and play pool. Other bar owners told an Irish paper last weekend that they'd be printing posters with Murphy's face on them to warn staff and other drinkers that he was in the area. This time last week, Larry Murphy was living anonymously in Amsterdam. 1 week on, all that's changed.
Before we discuss the fallout since last week with my guests in the studio, I'm joined now via Skype by Sander Paulus from RTL from Amsterdam, who we featured in Michael's package. Good evening, Sander, and thanks for joining us this evening. Can I start by asking you, how did you first hear about Larry Murphy?
Good evening, Nora. Well, it was the biggest Dutch newspaper who started all this, and then we all, were surprised enough to give it a hand because we saw the footage of the Irish television, of your journalist, and then we thought, what is happening here? So we found out, and then we saw what happened with Larry Murphy and his way of life, bringing him to Amsterdam.
And what was the reaction of people living in Amsterdam, Sander?
The people were shocked, not only in Amsterdam, but nationwide, because we air nationwide, we broadcast nationwide. And there was a lot of turmoil about, why doesn't the police do anything? What's happening here? Why can he live here like this, with this background of him, with his rape? And we were surprised, not to say the least, that he was living here like there was nothing wrong, Nora. It was, kind of unbelievable for the people in Holland that it just goes like that. But on the other hand, I have to say, there is something more to that, of course, because in Holland, he didn't do any crimes, not yet.
What did the Dutch police actually say about him?
Well, we called them, of course. We asked them what their opinion was. Was he on any list or something? Yeah, he was on a Europol signaling list. But it doesn't mean anything. It just means that we know that he's there. But the police doesn't have any people to observe him. And like I said, they wouldn't know where to start forming observation teams or anything like that, because there are a lot of people on the signaling list of Europol, and Larry Murphy is just one of them.
And is he believed to be still living in Amsterdam, Sander?
Well, this was the biggest news maybe of the evening, because when we started to ask some questions, quite quickly came clear that the police have no knowledge of his whereabouts at this moment.
Is there a feeling perhaps that Ireland has exported one of its problems to your country?
No, not at all. It's just the way he planned his visit, his stay here in Amsterdam. It's not like we think that the Irish put him here in Amsterdam to make our life miserable. Not at all. This is not a problem at all. It's just, unfortunate that he came to Amsterdam.
Well, thank you very much, Sander, for joining us here on Midweek this evening. And I'm joined now by Midweek reporter Michael Ryan, a columnist with the Irish Independent Kevin Myers, and barrister Paul Anthony McDermott. You're all very welcome indeed. Michael, I have to come to you first. What exactly happened last Thursday morning after the show was aired on Wednesday?
Well, I suppose, Nora, we knew it was going to be big last Wednesday night. I mean, no one had really heard or seen from Larry Murphy in about 2 years since he walked free from Arbour Hill back in 2010. On Wednesday night, I was on Twitter myself, just having a look around, and hashtag Larry Murphy, hashtag Midweek were sort of two of the top things trending that night. So we knew it was a big story. Got into the office here on Thursday morning, and a couple of Dutch TV stations had already been on, Sanders station being one of them, but a couple more were on as well, asking us who Larry Murphy was, saying they'd never heard of him, wondering if they could have the footage to use in their own reports that night. Sander works for a national television station in Holland, and they felt that it was something that everybody living in Holland needed to know about. I mean, I suppose we all know who Larry Murphy is over here. We'd seen his photo. He'd been very high profile. Over there, it was just a complete bolt from the blue. So it was a shock to them. So
in my interview there with Sander, it's clear that nobody there knew of the existence of this man. I mean, but you did speak to somebody from Europol or had some discussion with them, didn't you?
Well, Europol had told the authorities in Holland, they're obliged to tell the authorities in Holland that he was going to Holland. But I mean, beyond that, the police said that they weren't told exactly where he was going to be in Amsterdam. They have said, because obviously Sander has contacted them since, and they basically told him that, they're not obliged to, I suppose everyone's immediate reaction is we should follow this guy, but they're not obliged to do that. He's done his time as far as they're concerned over there. He's not wanted for any crimes, which he isn't, and, that they couldn't possibly follow everybody around. So that's where it ends, really, for them.
Well, Kevin, you've been writing about this case, and with a lot of anger, I think, in your column about how this man would only have served the length of sentence that he served.
Yes, it's absurd on a number of counts. The first is that essentially he had hit the clock on the punitive tariff was turned off halfway through the night. For everything that happened after then, he received no further punishment. He had received his maximum sentence almost by the first rape. Multiple rapes followed, an abduction, car theft, much violence, an ordeal more terrible than any of us can imagine. Yet after a certain point, the 15-year sentence that he got would have already been earned.
And do you think he should have been getting sentenced for each of the crimes he committed?
For each offence, it makes sense that you are punished separately and additionally. It violates all common sense that he should cease to be punished at a certain point. And then there comes to the point he only got 15 years. He was then given full remission. For what? How could he have earned remission when he refused to have any sexual therapy?
There's no obligation on a prisoner in Arbour Hill to take
There's no
therapy.
obligation for a governor to make a decision to give full remission. There is no obligation. That is a discretionary matter up to the governor, as you, as former minister, would know. The governor made a decision. That man should be in jail now. And he should be, of course, doing much more than 15 years. Any one of those rapes would have been worth 15 years.
Well, maybe I'll turn to you, Paul Anthony. Generally speaking, can the courts hand down consecutive sentences for a number of crimes? Like, try not to be specific to this one, but just generally.
They can, but they don't. What a judge has to do is he or she has to impose a sentence for every crime you've been convicted of. But then at the end of the sentencing, the judge has to decide, will all of those sentences run together or will they run after each other? And there are only a couple of areas in our law where a judge has to add them up so they run after each other. For example, if you commit an offence whilst on bail, that offence has to be added to any other sentence you have. Equally, if you commit a crime whilst you're in prison as a prisoner, that sentence can only begin when you've served your existing sentence. But after that, judges have a choice. And what seems to happen is, if events occur as part of a single transaction, a single incident, the judge is more likely to say, all of those sentences will run together. Whereas if you have raped a number of women on different occasions, in those circumstances, the judge is more likely to say, well, they're completely different incidents, all of those crimes should be added up.
So they could give consecutive sentences, but only if it's either in a different location, different crime. I mean, Kevin's point that this man had done many serious things, all of which would have led to a big sentence, and yet it's all lumped together. Could the judge not in this instance have given him, we could have given him life, couldn't he?
I mean, one thing to remember is rape carries a life sentence. It's the same sentence for murder. The only difference being, for murder, the life sentence is mandatory, whereas with rape, it's discretionary. And I've never understood why more life sentences aren't handed down for rape, because the fact you get a life sentence doesn't mean you serve life. What it means is it's now a matter for the governor and the Minister for Justice to look at you after 10 years, 15 years, 20 years and see, have you rehabilitated yourself? If you have, after 10 years, then maybe you are safe. Maybe you have changed your ways. But equally, if you don't avail of those programs, if you haven't changed, there's no particular reason why you should ever spend a single day at liberty again.
Well, and obviously if you get life, I mean, life, our viewers will be wondering, what exactly is a life sentence? Because they don't hear of people staying there forever.
And they don't. Most people would imagine if you get a life sentence, that means you're carried out of Mountjoy in a coffin. What it means is the judge has said you should serve life. But under our constitution, the judge selects the sentence, but then the government and the Minister for Justice and the governors, they decide how much of that sentence you're actually going to serve. And in some cases that can work, because clearly in some cases somebody may have committed one murder in a moment of fury, they're never likely to reoffend, and after 10 or 15 years, if they've tried to educate themselves, tried to go to programs, there probably isn't a lot of point of you locking them up till they die.
Kevin, I mean, clearly you're not happy with that situation. I mean,
I don't understand it.
Yeah,
I just don't understand how this man, and we know the background, it was during a spate, a serial murders of women in, we believe, in the Kildare, Carlow, Wicklow area. Now, it is incomprehensible to me, as it is to your audience at home, that in this context, a man who...
Now, we just have to be careful. He wasn't convicted of any
nor
other...
have I said.
Any of those
But he
people,
was a suspect. He was and remains a suspect. It is incomprehensible that a suspect, in this tragedy, could have received only 15 years. And incomprehensible is the word. I just do not understand how this is possible.
I have to say, I don't have any personal knowledge that he is still a suspect. There's no doubt he was questioned about it, but be that as it may, he is a man who has committed heinous crimes.
At the time of the offence, which was of quite shocking and unparalleled brutality, he was believed to be a suspect. There have been no murders of that kind in the area since his conviction. And I believe that we have to create, and this is a more contentious issue, that we should create a special dispensation when there's a serial killer at work, that the ordinary evidential rules don't apply and the ordinary judgmental rules don't apply, so that we can employ special legal measures as we do in the special criminal court. We can recognise that there are circumstances which mean that ordinary jury trials don't apply, as they do with criminals and terrorists. And we must also recognise the special need if we have another, God forbid, serial killer in our midst.
Well, we don't know. Larry Murphy wasn't convicted of being a serial. No, but I know what you're saying. So you'd like to see the law being changed to allow the kind of multiple offences to be taken more into account, rather than just in this.
Well, there are two things. One is the way a crime like this is investigated, and that's one aspect. But then, how is it dealt with when you have got a conviction? Well, you deal with it with such severity that the person you have found guilty will never, ever see the light of day, ever, outside of jail.
Could we, Paul Anthony, bring in legislation to stop somebody like Larry Murphy or somebody who's convicted like he was of travelling? I mean, could that be part of the sentence, that his passport would be taken away from him so that at least he would be in the country where he committed the offence?
It's very difficult to do that, particularly in the European Union, because, of course, one of your rights is freedom of travel, and it's very difficult once somebody's served their time.
Surely somebody who's done the kind of crimes he committed, some of your rights, you lose them.
I think so, and I think there's a lot in what Kevin Mice said in this regard. One of the rules of evidence we have is you can't tell a jury about the fact a person has previous convictions, and some of the time that makes sense. Clearly, if you're dealing with a shoplifter or somebody who's committed a minor crime, if you told the jury he's already been convicted in the past, the jury wouldn't give them a fair trial because the jury would be focusing on what they did in the past. I think it's different where you deal with somebody who may be suspected of being a multiple rapist. If somebody, for example, is going into court saying, I thought there was consent or it was an accident, I've never understood why the jury can't be told, look, you can listen to that explanation, you can choose to believe it, but by the way, this person has been convicted 3 times in the past for rape. Why shouldn't members of the public be allowed to have regard to that? And in a sense, in a way, lawyers think members of the public are stupid. We trust people to be on a jury. We trust them to take the oath seriously. So why don't we trust them to do their job, knowing all of the facts?
And
so
couldn't that be changed, Paul Anthony, in the court rules?
Yes, judges could change the law. However, it may also need prompting by legislation. But there's no doubt...
But not necessarily new legislation.
No, judges
could actually be in the court rules. I mean, Michael, when you were making your original film and involved in it, I'm sure you got concerns expressed that this person, although he had served a sentence, is quite likely to offend again.
Yeah, I mean, as we were saying last week with when Paul Williams was on, first, there's a fascination with this whole Larry Murphy story, the likes of which, Paul even said that he had never seen before, and, we know all the articles he's written on various different criminals. He's almost like, a Lord Lucan type figure in Ireland, Larry Murphy. And I suppose, in that people see him everywhere. He was in Kilkenny, he was in Leitrim, he was in Longford, he was in Cork, he was all over the place. And I suppose...
But not in Mountjoy Jail.
Well, not in Mountjoy Jail. But one of the things, I suppose, is that, and that we wanted people, I suppose, to take out of the programme last week and again this week, I suppose, is that, he's not in Mountjoy Jail, but he's not in Ireland, because there's a genuine concern and fear out there that people think that he's coming back in and out of the country. He's not. From what we can gather, he's abroad. He doesn't want to be in Ireland because the good thing about, the fact that people are so fascinated with him and the papers are so fascinated with him is that I think most people know his face at this stage.
I know. Kevin, I mean, would you be wanting to lock him up and throw away the key?
There's no question about that. And everyone at home wants the same thing.
I know,
just for that night alone. We don't have to prove anything else against him for what he did to that young woman. He deserves to be in jail for the rest of his life. And no question of release of any kind, ever.
I know,
It's deranged. You asked about the passport. We resupplied him with a passport.
That's right,
Spain.
he got a new passport, yes, recently.
So this is mad. This is dysfunctional. This is fatuous.
Well, maybe perhaps the results of this, and now that he has turned up in Amsterdam, will make maybe perhaps the judges, we can't interfere with the judges, maybe they will look again at how they pass sentences on somebody of such a heinous nature.
I think it's fair to say our criminal justice system is very, very good at dealing with crimes which have already occurred. What we've never really come to grips with, because it's so difficult, is how do we deal with people where we think they'll commit future crimes. On the one hand, the public have to be protected, but on the other hand, you get into very dangerous territory where you start locking people up or restricting them for crimes they may commit but may not commit.
Well,